Right now, Marvel on the rocks, so to speak, like, definitely on shaky ground. DC starting their universe. And frankly, I think DC has been on shaky ground for like the past decade, right? So there's been a lot of like issues there. And you have at this time like James Gunn doing his thing, taking maybe things he learned from Marvel, applying them to the DCU, but also trying to do things differently with the DCU and in some certain specific ways. So the first part of this massive expose deals with the idea of superhero fatigue, Superman, the Fantastic Four, and the idea of homework. And I guess we'll start at the beginning here. In a nondescript conference room in a very descriptive floor of Marvel Studios, full-size Iron Man statues, superhero murals, and all that. Behind that padlocked door is a whiteboard featuring plan for Marvel movies spanning the next 7 years. Now, that's kind of wild. Something we talked about before. They actually do have stuff on a whiteboard, and they keep it up there for a long, long time. And they try to sort of tinker and figure out a way to release it. So teased Marvel Studios boss Kevin Feige, the producer behind the most successful run of movies in Hollywood's history, as he welcomed a select group of journalists into the same room where he first met Doctor Strange star Benedict Cumberbatch and where the filmmaker Chloe Zhao pitched her take on Eternals. Marvel run has been tested of late, this year especially, with Thunderbolts and Captain America Brave New World, which grossed among the lowest totals of the company. But Feige isn't interested in your theories of superhero fatigue, which he doesn't buy as real. He pointed to DC Studios' Superman, which is doing strong at the box office, at least domestically. Feige said he texted filmmaker James Gunn to let him know how much he liked it. I love how you just jump right into it, Feige enthused of the film, which Gunn directed after he helmed 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies for Marvel before decamping to run DC Studios. You don't know who Mr. Terrific is? Tough. You'll figure it out. You don't know what this is? Just go. That is fully fleshed out world, which is cool. That's true. That's something I like about it as well. Even if he doesn't buy the idea of superhero fatigue, Feige and his team have done plenty of post-mortems on this year's underperforming movies, on all of the movies since the massive successful Avengers Endgame. Right now, the company is prepping for July 25th release of its latest movie, The Fantastic Four First Steps. It's the first movie Marvel Studios is handling the characters after a trio of movies of various quality and box office made by 20th Century Fox before 2019 acquisition by Disney. There was also a never-released 1994 feature-produced low-budget Roger Corman. We all watched that on stream together. Do you guys remember that? Pretty wild. Fun fact, the 4 stars of that movie cameo in Fantastic Four First Steps. Whoa, breaking news. I think it's probably just a fun little cameo. One thing Feige seemed to relish is that this new movie is mostly self-contained, and it's in a fully fleshed out world that doesn't require the dreaded word homework. We didn't want to have an Eternals issue where where have they been? How did they not help with Thanos? He explained. We wanted them to be apart from our reality so that we didn't have to say, oh, look, they were hiding over there. And highlighting the 1960s aesthetic, more than just a period piece, it's a unique aesthetic that felt like it could absolutely be its own world, its own reality, Feige said. And when shown to audiences in the screening process that we do leading up to it, people just accept it right off the bat and feel liberated that they could just enjoy what's ahead of them. He underscored, it's no homework required. Okay, now let's stop for a second here. You'd be forgiven for sort of losing the lead there. What is this entire sentiment about? What they're saying is Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios brought all these journalists out to Marvel, and they sat down in this interview, and basically everybody knows what it is. Okay, Marvel's on the rocks, slower year, tough. Everybody keeps saying superhero fatigue. He gets in there and he tries to draw a connection between Superman's success, which we'll talk about Superman's success, good, box office, doing well, not doing great internationally, which is kind of wild. And there's ways Superman could still go very poorly for DC. But it's interesting because he makes it a point to say, look at how Superman's doing. It can't be superhero fatigue if Superman is doing as well as it is. That's a fair point, right? Now, another interesting thing here is he tries to connect Fantastic Four to Superman by saying it's a film that you don't have to do homework for, set in this completely different universe. The aesthetic allows people to just experience it, etc., etc. So, like, big-time drawn comparisons to the Superman movie to kind of show that it's different, and all of that. Now, they go on in this article, and they say, yes, Feige knows Marvel made too many movies and shows and other things they did wrong, And look, here's a statistic, right? From the first Iron Man all the way to Endgame, Marvel produced 50 hours of screen storytelling. In the 6 years since, that number jumped to an astounding 102 hours of movies and television, 127 hours if you include animation. That's too much, Feige said, okay? Now, he gets into explaining that at this time, there was experimentation, evolution, and unfortunately, expansion. And he blames the expansion on devaluing what was going on. Okay, so really interesting things drawn here, okay? He talks about how there was a company push, but he also reveals that people at Marvel Studios were eager to do all of these things. So there was this mandate, but Marvel also felt like they couldn't lose and that they had an entire catalog of fresh things that people would love, okay? This is kind of similar to that Marvel Rivals energy, right? A lot of, like Marvel Rivals, they have infinite characters, and it feels like they're just going to keep making characters for the game to try to keep content out there, right? And I'm sure the Rivals team has a ton of stuff they want to do in that game. This is interesting because it's Kevin kind of admitting, like, yeah, we made way too much. There was a company mandate, but also we played a role here because we were so eager to do all of that sort of stuff that we embellished, we went hard, and it just became way too much. I think that's like a nice little thing to admit here. Now, here's another thing that's wild, right? He gets into Thunderbolts and why it failed despite being a very, very good movie. I'm so glad they're out here admitting this. You know, if you guys will recall, I love Thunderbolts, but the first Monday after Thunderbolts came out, I basically came out and said, this is a fucking disaster. And I got so much pushback. A bunch of people in Hollywood that got butthurt and were like, actually, the industry's just changing. We can accept losing $100 million on a movie that we just told people and investors is a sign of our new changed whatever, right? And I was like, this is not good. I'm so glad they came out there and kind of held the L with Thunderbolts because it would have looked so silly for them to be like, yo, this is great. This is exactly what we want. Everything's running, of course, totally. No. And in fact, there's several moments in this article where Feige talks about making big movies. He doesn't want to do this like little thing where we make it manageable. He wants to make big movies for a ton of people. That's the whole Marvel idea. That's what he wants to do, okay? Now, he draws a conclusion to the homework element to this film. And he also draws it to the Marvels, which is kind of interesting. But he says that like Thunderbolts featured all kind of characters that were seen on various platforms, including some only appearing on shows before the big screen. Some of them were still feeling that residual effect, the notion of, I guess I had to see these characters in other shows to understand who this is, Feige explained. I think if you actually saw the movie, that wouldn't be the case. And we make the movies so that that's not the case. But I think we still have to make sure the audience understands that. Okay. So this is interesting, dude. So first of all, he praises Superman. He says it's not superhero fatigue. Superman's crushing. Then he says Fantastic Four is great, just like Superman. No homework required. Okay? He's talking about how it's this lived and breathed in world, but then he's saying that like we just made way too much. We over embellished. That became homework and fatigued the audience. That became associated with Thunderbolts. That's why it underperformed. Okay? But I was thinking about this, and I wonder what you guys think. I think there's a difference between like further exploring something or like nerding out on something and homework. Okay? Like there's this thing that people say sometimes where they say, if you find the thing you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think a more modern version of that is like, if you can find the work that feels like play, you're going to be able to outwork everybody. Okay? And this is sort of a nuanced thing to explain, but I was thinking about this because Superman introduces this DCU. Since Superman came out, I have watched a lot more animated DC. I have read more DC comics. I am exploring DC. Now, you could call that homework. If it felt like homework, I probably wouldn't keep doing it. It would fatigue me. I'd get like butthurt. I wouldn't be down. Okay. Something happened with Marvel where it became homework, and it's actually like, I just hope that they're understanding that they took something that was a benefit and they turned it into a liability, because it wasn't always like this. I think part of the reason it ends up feeling like homework is because we didn't have that same love, that draw, the enthusiasm, the interest that we had when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was first popping off, and definitely not the same way that DC is hitting right now. Like DC, the establishing of the DCU is interesting. You want to explore it. You want to explore DC. You want to formulate these ideas. It doesn't feel like homework. Marvel turned something like that into feeling like homework. And I think part of it was like just way too much. But there's an element here of them going away from stuff that the majority of the fan base found exciting. And that is a part of why it ended up feeling like homework, okay? So either way, look, you have Feige coming out here kind of holding the L with Thunderbolts. This speaks to their view and their attitude on the genre, on fatigue. And I think you can sort of read between the lines here and think, oh, they're going to go bigger with bigger franchises. This also mirrors what Jeff Snyder and Daniel RPK have recently reported. That's that the shows, the Disney Plus shows, are no longer going to be the driving force of the narrative for Marvel. And that's good, because you can't have that. That's definitely feeling too much like homework, right? So you need that to exist in its own way. But that's literally just the start of this crazy fucking article. And I want to stop for a second here. Do you guys have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? This is just the beginning, but I think it's actually an important point because it speaks to this conversation we've been having. Like, what's going on with Marvel? Why is it like this? Like, what made the fall off happen? What's the difference between what DC is doing now and what Marvel is doing now?